Hello, everybody. Good to see you. Welcome to our, let's see. Yeah, it looks like it's connected, so good. Welcome to our Saturday CW Jah live discussion show. Number 32. We try to do it every Saturday. If you are someone who, like me, wants to meet regularly in order to discuss the Bible subjects, and in general, just try to encourage each other as best we can. What I generally do on these CW Jah Talk shows is I kind of will pick a basic theme. Usually it's indicated by the thumbnail. And sometimes we'll do like a special show or series, and it'll be more explicit. Like the most recent Angels of Jah and Zechariah. That was a multi-part series, very obvious what it was about. Otherwise, I put a picture, usually. Most of the time, I'll put a picture that represents the main idea or subject I want to talk about. Doesn't have to be the only one. In fact, it rarely is. Most of the time, we talk about a lot of things. I try to keep it to 2 hours or less. Sometimes we go a little over. It just depends, it's not like set in stone. But I do try to have sort of a guideline. And I also try to stay on long enough to include as many people as I think might want to join the show. We also, in our CW Jah Talk live discussion shows, except for the very first one, at the end of that one, we realized, you know what, we're going to partake at the end of every show, CW Jah live discussion show. We don't do it on other shows because we have different things going on. And this one we come prepared. This one we come prepared as best we can, right? We're all coming from different places in the world, walks of life, and we want to try to find something here to benefit from. Now, other shows, other programs, right? We get into all kinds of stuff. I've cut back on a lot of things, even though most recently, I took issue with some person that came up. I've tried to distance myself from, engagements that would be too aggressive or not really encouraging to maintain. Sometimes they're necessary, and I think even in the cases I'm thinking about most recently, like with Sam, while I wouldn't have thought initially they would have brought about a good outcome, I think they have. And I still think, it's something I don't think anyone saw, and there's something that resulted from that, at least for me, right? Because I'm not going to go to that extreme again on that level. I still have to deal with things, and I try my best, and sometimes things don't go as I plan, but overall, I think I am on the right track, and I have cut back and I removed a lot of stuff people didn't really like, not everything, of course, because I'm not here for other people, as you know. Well, by that, I don't mean, right? I mean, like Galatians 1, when I say that, when I say, I'm not here for you, you know what I mean, right? Of course, who else am I here for? Well, I'm here for Jah, Jesus, you and me. But I'm not here for you in a sense that, like, you can tell me what to do. If you have something worthwhile, of course, that's what we're here for, right? You tell me if I make a mistake or say something, if I need help, I try to tell you. But we don't really get in each other's lives like that because we don't know each other that well usually. But we are a community of people who have shared beliefs. We've known each other a long time, even if we don't know each other, like personally, like interacting. I mean, I've known Betsy and Everett for over 10 years through these means, right? Email, online, forums. I've known George, in the same way a long time. So good to see you all, by the way, TKS as well. So as I was saying, we try to use these shows to get something positive, right? We're trying to build a community of people, whether it's 2, 3, 4, or more, like we often have. But we're not here just to get as many people and try to do something like that. No, if that many people want to be involved and it produces something good, well, that's great. It's often harder to manage too many people anyway. Of course, it depends on the venue. You know what I'm saying? But I like our basic group in terms of our size and diversity of people around the earth. It's not like, not diversity like a buzzword you hear in often liberal media. Although, I'm not against diversity and inclusion. That's the whole weird part, It's like the liberals or the LGBT. They like to use their abusive lifestyles and cloak them in this whole diversity inclusion stuff. Nobody's against diversity and inclusion that I know. Except them, right? They're the ones who just want to be accepted by everyone, and then they don't accept people who aren't like them or don't totally approve of what they want, usually. So it's so backwards and weird. And we're like, well, wait a minute. No, we're okay with you. You can be a homo, abusive, whatever. That's your choice. No, I don't have to like it. Yes, I do think it's abuse. I can show you. It's real obvious, and you know it. So why are we going through this whole, fantasy dance? And, you're trying to you're gaslighting us is what they do, right? They just basically lie and pretend like what they're doing isn't a problem. Well, yeah, it is. That's why we don't do it. And we can prove it, right? It's not just because we don't do it. There's a reason, and it's bad for you. It's not the way, bodies work. We've talked about it. Either way, we pick a theme usually for these shows. And we'll talk about different things, but I thought of something for this show. It's not probably what you think. Now, if you look at the thumbnail, right? CDB Jah Live discussion number 32. Thank you all for joining me. Where am I? Yeah. Okay, good. Ricky's here. Very nice. Already mentioned Everett, Betsy, and TKS, George as well. Thank you all for joining me. I really do appreciate your time and the fact that you are enthusiastic about what I am as well. We like I said a moment ago, we know each other, but we don't know each other, and that's okay. Many Christians in the first century, they never met each other, but they heard about each other anyway, right? They had people like Paul and others who went around, brought greetings, brought letters, but it's not like all the Christians were bumping into each other all the time and hanging out, right? Very, very infrequently, probably, except in their local community or special occasion, I guess, right? It's not like people traveled to work like they do today. There was a lot of merchant work and traveling, but it's people often would work in their local communities if possible, and preferably for the most part, at least in the biblical periods, right? So in any case, we try to just work with each other no matter how well we know each other, right? Whether you know each other well or not, you could have problems. And, not everybody has to work together and like each other, right? Like I said, earlier, if I don't feel someone is respecting me and they're treating me like I owe them something, or, they're acting narcissistic in ways that then blame me for their dislike of certain things I do, right? When I know them least of all. It's stuff like that make it, more difficult, but we try not to let that get in our way. It comes up and we'll deal with things, right? Talked about Sam before, him too, right? Much better relationship with Sam, but it's still difficult to, right? I have to try to just accept that as where it is, like I've talked about. And maybe something positive can happen in a cooperative way, but Sam and I still fundamentally disagree, right? And we're too well-known apologists for these different views when it comes to the biblical God, Messiah. So it's not like we're never going to be engaging on some level, but I think in some respect, we have attained a respect that allows us maybe to do other things that we wouldn't have previously done. And so even when it comes to difficult things like that, people like I mentioned, right? People like I've talked about before, not just Sam, but others, and people I've engaged with. And we do what we have to, right? We all have our opinions, is what I'm saying. We all have positions, and that's why we have different religions often. It's unfortunate. It's where we are. And that leads me to something else I was going to bring up too. Before I get into the whole thumbnail thing, right? Number 32, what do you think that is? This is Tower of Babel, right? You could tell. I know you could tell. I tried to make it so you could tell. Although the one image, right, the outline on the left and the gold. If you haven't seen my text reading on Genesis 11, we're going to review part of it tonight because it perfectly captions what I want to show you on the Tower of Babel as a historical area and place and thing, right? It's something very important in our understanding of history, biblical history, human history. When you look at the evidence we have for languages, right? Look at all the different languages we have today, right? It's just, and that have been in existence that may not be spoken as they are today, but that were common in earlier periods. So thousands of languages, right, that we know. But they're all datable to no later, and this this is a stretch, but this is the farthest back I can see the events of the Tower of Babel and the evidence for actual language. And like I've talked about before, I sometimes give a range. I mean, I think the range for like the flood and all that, it could be between 3,000 and 4,000 BCE, but I don't know, so I'm leaning closer to 3,500, right? Closer to the 4,000 range, but it's not going to really probably hit that 4,000. We don't have evidence for language that goes back earlier than that. No, we don't. All their cave paintings and stuff, that first of all they're not as old as they claim. Again, they date things differently and don't reveal, nor do they have peer-reviewed things that would be essential to know in order to fully understand what they're talking about. And it conflicts with a lot of things. So they come up with dates. One of their more recent dates and findings was this piece of wood. I don't know if you guys saw that. We could bring it up, but it's not that significant. I think they're crazy, right? It's like a jointed piece of wood. You can look it up easily. 400,000 years is what they've dated, but they dated it. It even says it in the article. They dated it according to the sediment encasing the wood. And the wood itself, right, just like charcoal and things at Göbekli Tepe, wood from trees could be much older than the people who came there and cut the trees or from wherever they were and brought the wood, or if in that location, wherever the structure is built, right? So it's not always from the area, just like with the stone. It depends on what you want, right? So there's special trees and things mentioned in the Bible. Different types of wood from different locations, right? Cedars of Lebanon, different stuff like that. So either way, right, when they talk about dating and stuff, there's no corresponding evidence, right? Where, to me, right, there's a lot of things that are out of place, and we're still looking through a lot of evidence, and they're looking worse and worse all the time in terms of the consistency of their timeline. Remember, these people that date just human evolution in terms of these hundreds of thousands of years into the, earlier primate types of humans that they identify us with oftentimes, like Australopithecines, different things like that. There's no link, of course, no living link between us and any other primates, which is why we can't reproduce with them. Hence their belief in a missing link, which they often identify with these other fossils, which are just earlier primates. We have all kinds of different types, right? I forget, is it Gigantopithecus? I think is the name of the giant gorilla, right? These things go all the way back, right? This is not like recent creatures. Much earlier versions, like with the tigers, right? Saber-toothed tiger. So you have all these different earlier types, same with the horses, same with the camels. And they were often much bigger. Now, so this whole dating though, right? I'm just giving you a timeline and range, right? See how they see things, and they create this timeline of accidental evolution of things, right? Just this ongoing, right? First of all, I was thinking this earlier. You have to either believe in something or nothing, right? And what's nothing? Well, nothing is nothing. You can't get something from nothing. Well, that doesn't even make sense, right? You can only get something from something. That's scientifically a fact. You can believe something else. Not saying that. But there's no actual exam. It doesn't happen. Never. You can argue, some people try to argue things in the Bible and that, and I don't agree with them, right? I don't agree, for example, that the coins Jesus got in the water from out of the fish's mouth were made out of nothing, right? What did God just make coins and make them look old, and or if they're new, imprint them with the, Romans image on it? The Caesar's image on it? I doubt it. It seems like, well, why not just give them the coins then, right? The fish probably was used to eat the coins and bring them up and give them to Jesus and the disciples. So I don't see a problem with that. It doesn't say they were made out of nothing, so we don't have to believe that's what the account teaches. No other account says anything was made out of nothing. Everything is out of the Father. Right? And again, scientifically, you can't get something from nothing. Nothing by definition is nothing, right? If there's something, it's not nothing. And if that's nothing, then what's actually nothing when there's not something that's nothing? You see what I'm saying? So by definition, nothing is absolute nothing. It's like death, right? You're not alive. It's not possible. Now, maybe something living can bring you back because we believe that spiritually, but even physically, right? That's different. Again, that's life bringing life back. Either way, getting something from nothing doesn't make sense to me on any level. And there's no example of it. And I don't think it's taught in the Bible. Okay. So something always existed. They would have to believe that. Scientifically, evolutionists, non-theists would have to believe something always existed, right? Kind of like Hermogenes' eternal matter when Tertullian's dealing with him. Either way, there's different views on that. But Hermogenes is one of them. So that would have to be the consequence of a non-theist view of evolution, right? There would have to be something in order for us to have anything. So they would have. That's where they get this whole Big Bang, right? This point. There would have to be something, right? It's a point in something, and what they even speculated, what's outside of the universe. Well, again, we're not going to go there, but the fact is, they would have to believe something always existed. And it's unintelligent, according to them. Even if they believe evolutionists, non-theists, non-God people, even if they believe there's been an eternal life, to them it's unintelligent. To us, it's intelligent, right? We have both the life argument, that is the best argument, because it can be shown scientifically to occur every single day with everything that is alive, that reproduces. Life comes from life. And so we're not making that up. We just follow it all the way back, and that's the best result that you come up with. Otherwise, you start again with something that's not alive, but something and is eternal and not intelligent. You can go that way if you want, but that's not what life always coming from life that we can see every day demonstrates. And then you add the intelligence part, right? All the symmetry and everything, the mathematics, right? Things aren't just kind of dangling around as appendages that are useless on really anything. Yeah, mutations and things that aren't really what they're supposed to be. That's not what we're talking about. The intended design and reproduced intent of the thing that's in question would have you always has utility in every age, going all the way back, no matter what you think, right? The fossils, everything, they show utility to the environment, everything. People talk about predators, all these things I've talked about before, right? All those things have utility. They keep the oceans clean. They keep the land clean. Just look it up. There's no reason those things wouldn't continue, especially for dead things. That's why sharks feed on whales. Things like T-Rex, all these things would have been like cleaning machines. Now, whether or not they would have been predators in terms of killing living things is another matter. And how Jah would have dealt with that after the flood and before and after the flood. These are not things we can fully explore completely. We don't even have a full fossil record. So we have enough on our own, and with recent history and the animals we can actually live with and see, they all have utility, right? So I'm bringing this up just to kind of give context, right? I like to do that when I'm talking about major historical things like the Tower of Babel. Because that is also something we should be mindful of and using for people who want to hear, right? We can't convince people who don't want to hear. Maybe we can drop a seed, right? It's really all we can do. We give them something to think about and we move on. In fact, that's what I would recommend you do with Watchtower people most of all, right? Because they gain strength through engagement. I don't mean people like George or others who are friendly with them. I'm friendly with them. I mean the real hardcore ones that can't see what's going on completely and could be damaged, right? Best thing you can do is just plant a seed and don't engage with them. Let them think about that, right? Because you keep engaging, maybe even the same with others you engage with. Right? The more you engage, the more you that's why I like to just focus on the point, never let people off. If I'm debating, if I'm conversing, just chatting, I allow for a little more leeway. I try to just go with the flow. But when it comes to your time, my time, how you want to engage people, we talk about the flood, talk about life coming from life, all this stuff. Yeah, it is powerful. It would convince a lot of people. It convinces me, convinces you probably. It will not convince everybody. That people just don't believe certain things. That's just the way it's going to be. And as much as we want, remember that what we read the other day from the little shaman video, and the clip she gave, which is true, right? We've all seen that. And this doesn't matter whether you perfectly present the information, facts, or like we were talking about, language. It's not datable farther back than 4000 BCE. Well, they think they've got wood structures, like I was mentioning, dating the encasement, the sediment, but they think the wood structure with the joint in it is 400,000 years old. So we have language that goes back to 4000 BCE at the most, more like 3035 in terms of the actual evidence. I'm not talking about cave painting and saying, I'm talking about language, cuneiform, hieroglyphs, proto-cuneiform, like on the Fuente Magna Bowl, which I believe is a pre-flood item, matches the cuneiform that we see in Mesopotamia, part of the pre-flood world. The language, the one language and set of words that everyone had, which has both a mixture of glyphs and cuneiform. Proto-cuneiform is what people call it. Fuente Magna Bowl. I did a blog on it. You can type in, you'll see. Greg Stafford, Fuente Magna Bowl. Either way, it's good to see AK from the UAE. Thank you for joining us. We're going to get to some really good stuff here in just a moment, but I like to go over a little bit, give people time to join, kind of pump you up with some facts and things. We're going to talk a little bit about the Tower of Babel. I'm going to show you some stuff, okay? Like, in as brief as I can, 10, 15 minutes, best stuff. But it's not why I'm showing it to you. There are two key things I want to try to highlight above everything else. And there's going to be a lot. But I think I can get to it in a brief period of time. We have it set up. So beyond what I already stated, right? All the evidence we have with languages and stuff, I've written about it. You can look it up yourself. You can see how old many sources aren't totally up to date, but they're all pretty still close. Again, we just don't have the evidence for languages that are like diverse, like you see today, thousands of languages. That's all within the last 5,000 years. Okay, before that, there's just one. Basically one, even if you wanted to say two, like glyphs and cuneiform, because they kind of overlap a little, maybe. Again, some of these datings and things are not exact, but we try to allow latitude and just say, okay, well, look, we're looking at a historical record in the Bible that's telling us before this global flood all these civilizations talk about, right? It's not by far a biblical story. It is, but it's like all over the place. And the evidence, of course, we talked about that as well. I'm not going to get off into it, but I mentioned a few things to try to just show you, hey, this is the stuff going on today, right? They're saying these structures and things, this encased sediment they've dated 400,000 years ago. Okay, well, where's the language? Where's the where are the complementing social features that would indicate a human type civilization capable of crafting and jointing wood with metal? It doesn't make sense, right? There would have to be some corresponding civilization, language, metallurgy, astronomy. They're not dating the metal to that age. They're dating, again, as I said, and you can read in the article, the sediment encasing the wood. And these dating techniques, they do that often, right? They date one thing and attribute it to the other. And then we have to try to figure out, okay, how does this really, what are they doing here? And most of us don't have a lot of time to get into all of these articles in science, so we rely on peer review. And if they haven't even been peer reviewed, that should tell you right there, okay, this is something one person or team is out there saying because of what they found encased in the sediment, and it doesn't match anything. And when you look at the cataclysmic effects of the flood, totally destroyed the earth, transformed it, put cities that were above water, below water, put areas that were below water, above water. I believe the Grand Canyon was one of those. It looks just like a structure that was underwater at one time. Well, whether or not how much that may be the case, we know a lot of North America was even believed scientifically to have been underwater. They try to make sense of all these different things, the Ice Age and stuff. It never fits the totality of evidence, like the Bible. The Bible has a record based on an oral tradition that was eventually written down, carried through generations before and after the flood, and written down, consistent with all these civilizations, and that accurately describes locations. Babylon, we're going to get to it. Tower of Babel, we're going to get to it. And what happened? There was one language, one set of words, Genesis 11. And people migrated after the flood, after landing on Ararat, and heading southeast down into Sumer, Mesopotamia, and then into Babylon. And then, like the Bible describes and other historical accounts describe, you have Nimrod. Nimrod is the founder of Babylon, according to the Bible. He's also, according to other records, the founder of other cities like Nineveh, a known, within the last, I think, 100, 150 years, found city that I think people disputed existed, but it's right there, right? It's got all these records and things, a lot of cuneiform spoken about throughout the Bible. Another city founded by Nimrod. Okay, so we have all this language, right? We have all this language that came about and that really we can only point to as having come about apart from the one existing language, maybe two, depending on whether you see glyphs and cuneiform as two. And they may have been one before the flood and after the flood too, right? Because the Fuente Magnable has both. So I say it's a proto-cuneiform, maybe the one language. Either way, the Bible describes the separation at Babylon, which fits the historical record. This would have been between 3000 and 4000 BCE. I believe this would be more likely between 3000 and 3500 BCE, right? I believe the events, the flood and preceding the flood, within a couple hundred years, I would put between 3500 and 4000 BCE, okay? And then Adam and Eve and all that between 4000 and 45. Somewhere like that, right? Probably closer to 4,000. But again, I'm just giving a 500-year ranges to give you a basic timeline, right? Give you kind of a visual without getting too precise right now. It's not necessary. I had to, I could, but I'm giving you kind of glimpses into where this is happening. All right, consistent with all the what we know about all the Egyptian dynasties and things, right? And we have many things in Egypt which could even be dated to before the flood, including the Sphinx. So, right, again, you see all the surrounding area of the Sphinx that has those massive water erosion channels. Well, what caused that? We already know that the area of the Sahara Desert was lush and green at one time within the last 10,000 years. And it fits that it would have been similar to that during the time before the flood and potentially after. And certainly the flood would have caused those gigantic channels of water running down around the area of the Sphinx. Remember, the Sphinx was only discovered within the last, I think, 200 years. 300 years. It was buried completely in sand, like Göbekli Tepe, right? Again, you have these places. What's moving all this sand, right? Maybe the Egyptian desert. That's a lot of wind. I understand that. Can happen, but that's not everywhere, and certainly not the conditions of Göbekli Tepe. Either way, it wasn't in the past 10,000 years a desert sand area. It was just the opposite. Okay, so it transformed. It totally changed. Same with West Africa, Mauritania, Northwest Africa, where Atlantis is believed to have been, and where the Eye of the Sahara is and matches exactly. I have a video on it. The description Plato gives about Atlantis, which I believe is a pre-flood city, potentially built, and if it really is, then it had to have been built by a son of God, right? Whom history identifies as Poseidon. Again, everything fits. Biblical record. Okay. Now, talking about Tower of Babel, right? I want to show you some stuff. All right, let me bring it up. Tower of Babel stuff. Let's do it. But that's not, I am bringing up the Tower of Babel, to help give you, encouragement about the historicity of the Bible and the accounts related to the Tower of Babel. We talked about a few other things, but I was just sort of contextualizing it in the grander scheme of history. So we're all kind of looking at it, and then we'll go to Babylon, and we're kind of looking at seeing the flood. Sometimes perspective is important. And I think for events like the Tower of Babel, it is very important. It's important we understand where it happens, when it happens, basically, right? If we connect it with the timeline I gave, which is also consistent with the Mayan calendar, by the way, that talks about the flood as well, and civilization, which it clocks after the flood, it says, basically, which is around 3000 BCE. So, I'm pretty sure, I think it's around 3000 BCE. Either way, it's close enough to the timeline that I've identified with the Bible, excuse me, to show that, okay, so if they landed on Mount Ararat and migrated and descended, and the animals came out, and Noah and his family and his sons and their wives, and they started to have children, and all these things happened. Noah had the vineyard, right? Things happen. Him and his daughters, things happen. Population of the earth is growing. Just purpose is happening, right? Messiah, all these things, all these people, things are going on. Eventually, they populate down into Sumer, and all of the secular authorities agree with this, by the way. You notice that? They say, if you look in the secular history books and archaeological stuff, not like biblically oriented stuff or the Bible, well, although they often will agree it's correct, the way they talk about these things, right? They identify basically Sumer, Mesopotamia, as what? The cradle of civilization. Everyone outside of the Bible, if you're not a religious person, most people see Mesopotamia Although that's expanding a little bit today, right, with Göbekli Tepe and stuff. But again, that all fits with the Bible. And that's what they're not seeing. They're seeing stuff. They're seeing it goes further back than Mesopotamia, right? It's obvious at this point. It's sunken cities, all that stuff. This is datable before the Mesopotamian migration. And the evidence we have, these places like Babylon. So, or the place like that later where Avram came to be. Right? These are all real places that have been found and identified consistent with the Bible. So if what I think is correct, and sources like the Mayan calendar and other sources suggest is probably the case, and these histories and other epics like the Epic of Gilgamesh and others that would be datable, would be consistent with a date for the flood, we'll say between 3000 and 3500. I'm going to use around 3000 for my purposes, though. And I think it's probably close. All right. So if Noah landed around that time, how long would it have taken probably for all of the people? Our people populate quickly. If you don't think so, just look in the last 200 years at any country. Okay? Yeah. People populate in the millions very quickly. Same with animals. So it's just something, I don't know why people have a hard time seeing this. This is very fast. This happens. I would say certainly less than 200 years, they would have been moving into Mesopotamia. They would have been moving down and having people moving around. By the time they would have gotten into Babylon, right? Because I think you go down into Sumer and then you kind of come up into Babylon, modern day Iraq. Excuse me. So Nimrod probably, I would say, would I'm seeing Nimrod somewhere between 2700, maybe 20, excuse me. Yeah, I'd say 2700, maybe 26 to 100 to 3000 BCE is where I'm seeing Nimrod. Excuse me. Throat gets a little dry sometimes when I bring a little drink. Sometimes I talk loud or fast, Try to slow it down, just breathe in. Keeps it hydrated. So that's kind of where I think we are with the Tower of Babel. All right. Now, with that in mind, right, we're around, I think, 2700 to 3000 BCE when it comes to Nimrod founding Babylon and then building the tower. Be right at the point where language will be confused, but it hasn't yet. Okay. So I'm at the point, I want you to be there kind of with me, which is why I'm building this way. I'm at the point where they're in Babylon. Nimrod, the same language. Everyone is speaking the same language. And they're in Babylon, and they're doing what the Bible says. We're not going to read the entire account. I have a text reading on it. You can go to my playlist. We're gonna watch part of it, but not all of it. So we can, I don't have to duplicate the same stuff because it said I can play the sections real quickly right here. I'll bring you guys up in a second, right? So we're at the point where they're all speaking the same language and they haven't dispersed like throughout the earth. They've come down from Anatolia or modern day Turkey down into the area of Mesopotamia and Sumer and into Babylon, modern day Iraq, maybe into some of the surroundings, some people, right? Not like, I'm speaking of the majority. When I say they, I'm not speaking of like every single, we may have people who have just taken off and gone down to Egypt, at some point. But it seems like the way the Bible presents it, they're kind of all together. They're all speaking the same language. They're all together migrating, right? Probably Noah has died at this point or close to it. or is still alive, but not migrating with the group. Either way, I would say the majority by far are all in this migration, right? Throughout this area into Mesopotamia, Sumer, Babylon. So I want to show you evidence that you should be aware of before I get to the main point. And there's two very important things I haven't mentioned yet. They're critical, really. One of them has to do with what I believe is the devil's tactic. You know, before we get back to the Babel stuff, Tower of Babel, and it's important too, there's a point about that I'm going to make that isn't obvious based on what I'm telling you right now. All the stuff I'm telling you is very important. Like all this historical stuff. I mean, hopefully you can see that. But it's not why I'm telling you. Okay? And I'm not hiding something. It's just the way it has to be. You'll see. First, though, I do want you to believe, and I want you to kind of be reminded things we've talked about a little, but I want to go over it again. That's why we meet together, right? We be built up, encouraged. I do want to remind you of the things that show the historicity of the Bible, in particular the Tower of Babel and these things I'm talking about, language and stuff, when it really became diverse like it is now, and evidence when it was not, consistent with this whole account. I want you to remember all this, which is why I'm still going to show you more, right? That image on the thumbnail, that's important. I'm going to show it to you right now. That's the Tower of Babel stele. Very important. A lot of people don't know about that. I did talk about it, 3 years ago. It's not like the most popular video, but I'm going to share a section of it with you. And this will kind of update that a little. And I might do another video about it at some point. Yeah, definitely at some point. But let me just go ahead and play this. I'm going to bring you guys up, and it's going to show you things I want you to see. But I show it to you in this video, so I don't want to repeat it. I'm just going to show it to you, and then we'll watch it together, right? Let's see. Okay. Bring this up. Okay, how will this look? That's me like 3 years ago. Not good lighting, right? You can see the sunlight in the background through the windows. I've learned a few things. I don't take it super seriously. I'm just sort of me in my main office and library talking to you. I do have a good setup, and I have a lot of things here, but I've learned a few things that at least make the lighting look a little better from what it used to be, as you can see. One of those has to do with the time of day you do this stuff. Either way, we're going to deal with it. Let me just change that, because although I might move down, but the more important thing is what I'm going to be talking about and showing you. So let's go ahead and listen in for just a few minutes, right? Not a whole lot. Just give a couple minutes, which is what I would be telling you anyway. Important stuff directly related in this first part to the image on the thumbnail. The one on the left, the image of what is the Tower of Babel. One on the right, I thought would be more easy for you to think of in that way. The one on the left looked more finished though, right? So either way, I want to show you the details about that stele image that I did talk about in this video. It's 3 years ago. Well, let's just go over it real quickly again. And this, again, was one of my early videos. We'll probably redo this at some point when we go back through this. Part of what we refer to as our text readings. By the way, I will be here again tomorrow. I will be here again tomorrow doing a text reading. So if you'd like to join me for a second live stream this weekend, watch for the notice in the morning. I'll put it up as early as possible, and you can join me. We will also be partaking at the end of this show. Probably another hour or so, and we'll be done. Not a whole lot more to go, but about another hour, because we're about to get to it. I'm going to make my special application after I show you the details, right? Give you the rest of the evidence. and then I'm going to make this other application of it, right? Why I'm really bringing up the Tower of Babel account. Yes, to give you the facts and information to kind of go over the history of language and stuff, but I more so want to do something else with it, okay? I don't mean to keep you in too much suspense, but I can't tell you now. More facts first. Then I'm going to share with you what I think is the devil's tactic today. It won't take long. No scripture. Well, maybe a couple. But it's very important. Right? What do you think I mean by the devil's tactic? You know, I think I found something out. And I don't mean to be too dramatic on that either. But it occurred to me, I was thinking, you know, Jesus said, if Satan divides against Satan, how will his kingdom stand? That makes sense, right? If you divide against, yourself, it's not going to work. But Satan would know that too, right? He would know it both from Jesus saying it and the biblical account. And in general, probably they know that and they're not stupid. But when they do things, right, how do they account for that? How is Satan accounting for what he would probably have to see as true, right? Like if Jesus ever said to him, how are you going to, you divide against yourself, how are you going to come to anything, right? Jesus probably knew that would never happen and mentioned it, maybe. He certainly said it, right? Whether ever he said it to the devil in some way, I don't know. Certainly speaking to him indirectly, right? So what is the devil doing to counter that? How is he accounting for that? I think I know how. And you want to hear this. You definitely want to hear this. All right, let's get back to the Tower of Babel, though. We got more stuff, more facts. Bankhead's in the house. Bankhead's here. I mentioned Ricky, Everett, Betsy, TKS, and George, right? We're ready. And AK from the UAE. Very nice. Appreciate that. Ricky's mentioning something about someone building a Tower of Babel in Strasbourg for blasphemy. Yeah, they do that a lot. They got stuff going on in New York too. Right? It's never going to go the way they want. And they want to be pagan and they want to promote paganism and Nimrod, right? Nimrod is really a big part of a lot of these different religions and things, right? Zeus and others. I think it comes up a little here. Either way, a lot of this really goes back to Nimrod, which if you think about it, makes perfect sense, right? Nimrod and these other figures like Osiris and Zeus, they're basically, especially Nimrod though, right? He resisted Jah. And that's what Satan does, right? It's just sort of like an image of Satan, if you think about it. Anyone who would embody resistance like that to Jah, I mean, that's a satanic image, right? And that's why I think it's been used ever since Nimrod in these different forms. Well, we won't get off onto it. I've talked about a little. There's a lot having to do with Nimrod and different representations of Nimrod and his mother and father, right? But we'll talk about that another time. Let's get back to the Tower of Babel and the time when languages were dispersed, right? All right, so we've talked about the evidence. I didn't go into it. It's not this isn't the show where I am here to show you everything. I have discussed it. You can easily look it up. Oldest known language, oldest known written language. It's all going to be about where I'm telling you. And I'm accounting for everything, right? I'm pretty up to date on archaeological finds, especially when it has to do with the Bible or language or the dating of actual evidence of humans, right? And what they're dating. That's mostly what I want to know, right? You can say anything. I think they've got a lot of stuff wrong. I think they've got the dinosaurs wrong. I think they got a lot wrong. I'm not saying they have it all wrong in every way. I don't think, as you know, if you watched all my text reading Genesis videos, the Bible's consistent with the earth having been made unknown amount of time ago, right? We don't know when it was made in the beginning with the heavens and the earth. God made the heavens and the earth. And then God came back and the earth was formless and void, right? So we don't know how long it was in that state, formless and void. before God pulled the waters back and started acting upon it? We don't know. So there's a whole period of time that we are not told about that would account for all of this age. And when God decided to go to the earth and actually start making changes and doing these things, right? The beginning of humans and the physical, actual creation of the earth and the things on it. Either way, when it comes to the Tower of Babel, right? We've talked about language. Remember that. Very important that you understand some of the details of how old language actually is. The actual systems of writing, okay? I don't believe we have evidence for any language older than 4000 BCE. And that's adding probably 500 years or more to what you'll see in most of the dates you'll get when you type oldest known language. Okay, so it all fits. Then look at how many languages, right? It's not like there's 10 or 20. We're talking, thousands of languages since what? 4000 BCE at the most? And before that, there's only one really that could be identified, cuneiform-like or proto-cuneiform. So that's pretty significant evidence. I would really make sure whoever you talk to or try to communicate with about things involving the Bible, that you try to make it clear to them how this fits with history and language and things that are very unique, not something that happens every day, right? This massive influx of communication systems that are all effective in most ways and can be defined over this limited period of time, which is exactly what the Bible says. All right, so before we get to actual images of things involving the Tower of Babel and the remnants, let me play this part of my video. Let's listen together, and then I'll talk about it. All right, just a couple minutes here. Listen to this evidence. And see what you think about it. We're going to go to the stele, the Tower of Babel stele. I kind of brought this up earlier as we were getting ready for the show. And I was just going over a few details that I was going to get into. So, how many of you have seen this? Sorry, I was actually adding a few comments there, but I don't think I had my mic on. So we'll just forget that. But I was saying, how many of you have actually seen this? It was a question I was asking before I didn't have my mic on. This is something I don't think a lot of people are familiar with. Right? We're familiar with certain other historical items, but the Tower of Babel stele is something you should remember. All right? I'll give you guys a moment. Take a look at it. Let me see if I can increase it. I guess that's about as big as I can make it. I don't want to mess up the other sizing. So take a good look at it. You can see a figure here. His head, his beard, his hand, torso. I would make it bigger for you, but I don't want to mess up the way I have my video that I'm watching. So, I think you can see basically what I'm describing. And you can see the head up here. You're going to see the tower taking shape right here. And so if I have to, I'll bring up a better image, but I'm just leaving it the way I have it in the original video. Okay, so if you can't see it in the detail that you want, you can look it up separately, but I'm going to show you more detail in just a second.
If you look over here where my cursor is, you see these steps? If you look close, you can see these steps going up just like my cursor here from the middle crack up to on this left. You got those steps. It goes all the way up and then it goes back down. I don't know if you can see it, but if you look closely, I'll put links below as well when I'm done. Or you can look it up yourself. Sometimes I forget, so just remember, you can always type in what I'm telling you, and you should be able to bring it up. And then to get a clearer picture, right? So take a look. Take another good look at this. I know it's not easy to make out entirely, but now look at it. So that's an outline. It's the same stele. See the crack in the middle?
And it's going to come back on, but I just, before I paused it, as you saw a minute ago, and you'll see again, that's the image that I put on the thumbnail, part of it. So it's an outline, excuse me, in the published source that I'm showing you here and that you can find online about the Tower of Babel stele. And so the outline is in a published, accepted source. It's not me doing that. That's what the engraving on the stele shows. It's just, not brand new. So, but they can tell based, and I can even see it. If you look closely, you can see all the different steps and all the, most of the detail, but in their, with their tools and techniques, it's more clear. So I'll show it to you again.
It's just, you'd have to get, the right kind of material in order to trace over it or to get a higher resolution like they do here. And this is what it's showing. This is the Tower of Babel. And Nebuchadnezzar and his record of restoring it. So we're going to get to that right now. Go back to this image. And so it has an inscription here along with the image. We're going to get to that right now. So there you could look up the inscription on your own in another place as well, but I'm just going to use this one. And here it gives the text. So obviously there's the image. And this also has an outline image as well, right there. I could have used that one. So here's another outline of what you see on the actual stele. You see cuneiform right here. Here's the Tower of Babel. Here's the outline of it. And this is Nebuchadnezzar.
Okay, so you might be wondering, well, how could this be the Tower of Babel if it's Nebuchadnezzar and we're in the 6th, 7th century, right? Well, because again, as I said in that video a moment ago, this is a restoration of the Tower of Babel that Nebuchadnezzar did. He's going to tell us that when I read the inscription, the translation of it right now. So again, I want to give you a timeline. I believe the actual Tower of Babel was built by Nimrod and everyone with him, or part of it, right? They didn't finish it. That's why Nebuchadnezzar finished it. It was left unfinished, and Nimrod went and founded all these other cities, probably because he didn't have all the people that he originally had when he was building it. Everyone went off to do their own thing. So he probably took off like he actually did. The accounts say, and we're going to read it, the Bible says, the historical records say he founded other cities, including Nineveh. So no one was there building and finishing the tower. But Nebuchadnezzar did finish it.
All right, so let's read the inscription. This is what is written on that stele. This stele that shows this image of the Tower of Babel. The stele is dated to the late 7th, early 6th century. Here's what it says. This all capital text. I'm going to try to keep it all on screen. This is what it says. Etemenanki. That's the name of the tower. And we'll get to that more in a moment. So that's not what it says yet, but this is what it's referring to. This is what the inscription says. The house, the foundation of heaven and earth. Ziggurat in Babylon. So actually, this is the inscription. Etemenanki, Sikurat, Babibli. The house, the foundation of heaven and earth. Ziggurat in Babylon. Etemenanki, right here, it's what it's also referred to, means the foundation of heaven and earth. Or even inclusive of the house. The house, the foundation of heaven and earth. Well, what did the biblical account in Genesis say? Right here. Let us build for ourselves a city and a tower, the head of which will be as far as heaven. So it's on the earth as far as heaven. What is Etemenanki, the Babylonian ziggurat inscription? Tower of Babel stele, 7th, 6th century. By Nebuchadnezzar say, the tower is the foundation of heaven and earth. And then it goes on to, the caption identifies the great ziggurat of Babylon, the Tower of Babel. The royal inscription of Nebuchadnezzar continues. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon am I. In order to complete Temen Anki and Ur Me Imen Anki, I mobilized all countries everywhere, each and every ruler who had been raised to prominence over all the people of the world, loved by Marduk. From the upper sea to the lower sea, the distant nations, the teeming peoples of the world, kings of remote mountains and far-flung islands. The base, he's talking about the base of the Tower of Babel. The base I filled in to make a high terrace. Etemen Anki is another way of referring to the Tower of Babel. You'll see that. And it's fairly evident here, but let's go on with the inscription. The base I filled in to make a high terrace. I built their structures with bitumen and baked brick throughout. I completed it, raising its top to the heaven, making it gleam bright as the sun.
Right there, right? He finished it by making its top to the heaven, the inscription says. Right there, if you look at the highlighted part, the base I filled in to make a high terrace. I built their structures with bitumen and baked brick, which is the exact same material the structure was originally built with, and that is described in the Genesis account. It explicitly states that's the building material, bitumen and baked brick. I completed it, raising its top to the heaven, making it gleam bright as the sun. See, remember, in the Genesis account, they left off and didn't finish it. And Nimrod and everybody took off. Nimrod went and founded numerous other cities, including Nineveh. They just left. But the Babylonians came back, or some were there, of course, still, probably. At some point, though, of course, they then rebuilt not only the tower, but the city, and of course became a mighty power. And right here we have the account from the 7th century, late 6th century BCE, the inscription by Nebuchadnezzar confirming what he did. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon am I. In order to complete Etem and Anki and Ur men Imen Anki, I mobilized all countries everywhere, right? I mean, this is the king of Babylon, right? This is the Daniel king, one of the kings of the book of Daniel, one of the kings that were imprisoning God's people, right? So this is a major figure here. And this is a record of what he did with the Tower of Babel, which was beloved by Marduk, also mentioned in the Bible. He brought kings and rulers from everywhere. Each and every ruler who had been raised to prominence over all the people of the world, loved by Marduk. From the upper sea to the lower sea, the distant nations teeming with people of the world, kings, remote islands, far-flung, right? He's saying he ordered all of this in the late 6th century, probably, to finish this Tower of Babel and get its top all the way up. Which I go on in this video here. It's the Genesis 11 text reading in my playlist on text readings. I go on to discuss the quotes about the Tower of Babel from Herodotus, Greek historian, and Josephus, and how, you know, the Tower of Babel, after Nebuchadnezzar finished it here, was eventually damaged by Xerxes after he fought with the Greeks on his way back from fighting with the Greeks. It was also damaged by Alexander the Great. When he came, he tried, actually, it looks to me like from the accounts, he actually tried. We're going to actually review part of my reading of one of those right now. I'll go ahead and bring it up. 103. Let me do that here. Oh, let's bring it up. Right, so Alexander actually tried to expand it. He was trying to, you know, honor it in some way. But it ended up getting further destroyed. So that's why you're going to see pictures of the remnants now. It's still massive and impressive. But it's obviously gone through quite a bit. But I don't think a lot of people really understand a lot of the evidence, or they forget, right? We all forget. But it's very important that we don't forget some of this stuff. We need it. We need to encourage ourselves, encourage other people, say, look, no, this is real stuff here. This is not fantasy. This isn't some part of an artificial timeline and events that we just put together and because they make sense to us. No, this is this is the evidence right here. Right? We have actual data, records, locations, pictures, inscriptions. I am reading from Arian of Nicomedia, a Greek writer of, I think, the 3rd century CE. No, it's not as old as like the Tower of Babel stele or Herodotus or Josephus, but it nonetheless does describe certain additional information I wanted to share with you. So let me go ahead and play that.
Including this one on Alexander and the Chaldeans. And in his work, the Anabasis, Xenophon was not the only one who wrote a work called the Anabasis. In section 7.16.5, starting here, this is what he has to say about Alexander during his conquest of Babylon. Excuse me. On his march to Babylon, let me get this covered a little bit. There we go. Alexander, after crossing the Tigris, was met by some wise men of the Chaldeans who drew him aside and begged him to go no further because of their god Bel. Oh, we'll take a look at that. Well, part of the link says to what I just clicked on that reading. It means Lord, just like Baal, right? The name of the Babylonian supreme god Marduk, whom we read about earlier, was almost never pronounced or written down. See, they started to call Marduk Lord, just like they're calling God Lord and have been calling him Lord and replacing Jehovah's name with Lord, claiming it's too holy to pronounce. That's a Babylonian belief related to the god Marduk. Has nothing to do with the biblical text. Not one biblical text says anything about God's name being too holy to pronounce or that you should substitute it with any term. That's what other people chose to do. Just like the Babylonians did with Marduk. And then it says his temple was the Isaglia. Another important monument was the temple tower at Temenanki, like we've been reading about the Tower of Babel. The foundation of heaven and earth, according to the stele, Tower of Babel, Nebuchadnezzar, 7th, 6th century. The Greek authors called this complex sometimes the tomb of Belus, Zeus Belus, like Herodotus said. Baal, sometimes the temple of Belus. The name is related to Baal. Let's go back to that text. And there's actually another link here to this note. You see it brings this up right here. The Greek name Balas is a translation of Akkadian Bel, Lord, the title of the Babylonian supreme god Marduk, who is venerated in the Isaglia, or Isagala. All right, let me remove that note. And then it says, so drew him aside to go no further because, so these wise men came out, met Alexander, and advised him to go no further because their god Bel or Baal had foretold that if Alexander entered the city, Babylon, at that time it would prove fatal to him. And then Arrian goes on to say, Alexander replied by quoting to them the line of the playwright Euripides, prophets are the best who make the truest guesses. This is Alexander talking to the Chaldeans according to Arrian of Nicomedia. And the account goes on, my lord, said the Chaldeans, look not to the west. Do not march westward with your army, but turn about and go eastward. But this was not easy for Alexander to do, as the country to the east was impracticable for troops. The truth was that faith was leading him to the spot where it was already written that he should die. This is according to Arrian. And then at 7.17.1, Alexander had some suspicion that the Chaldeans' attempt to prevent him from marching to Babylon on that occasion was not, in fact, based upon a prophecy of impending disaster at all. Excuse me. On the contrary, its object, he felt, Alexander, might well be to secure their own advantage. In Babylon stood the great temple of Baal, a huge edifice of baked bricks set in bitumen. Let's take a look at the note. The Isagala complex dedicated to Marduk, one part of it was the Temenanki, the Tower of Babel, right here. 7.17.2, like the other shrines in the city, it had been destroyed by Xerxes on his return from repose to restore it.
Just to remind everyone, we're reading from Arrian of Nicomedia. He's a Greek historian from the late 1st to mid 2nd century CE. I said earlier, I think I said 3rd century CE. It'd be late 1st to mid 2nd century. It's a little bit earlier than I thought. And he's writing about Alexander's involvement with the Babylonians in the Tower of Babel. So let's just get back and finish this part here. So
again, you had after the restoration by Nebuchadnezzar, you had subsequent destructions or damagings to the Tower of Babel. It says here by Xerxes, and then Alexander came in and wanted to restore it. And then it refers to Alexander's rebuilding mentioned here in a cuneiform text. Let's take a look. Let's see what it says. If I can get the link to come up. It's not bringing up the link. All right, so we'll just leave that note aside for now. So Arian goes on and says, according to some accounts, he intended to rebuild upon the original foundations, and for that reason the Babylonians had instructions to clear the site. Others say he intended a still larger building than the old one. So Alexander wasn't necessarily trying to destroy the temple of Marduk or the Tower of Babel, but it looks like he damaged it, or at least cleared away a lot of stuff from surrounding the tower, may have removed part of it in order to, at least as part of his plan, rebuild it. At least according to Arian here. He goes on to say, the workmen, however, once he was out of the way, that's after Alexander died, dawdled over their job, so he proposed to set all his troops to work upon it. Oh, or actually before he died, but wasn't there, I guess. It goes on to talk about how after he died, they just left off. But the rest of this account we'll just read. It says, so after Alexander died, they dawdled, but then he got even more serious about it. And then Arian says, now a great deal of land and considerable treasure had been devoted by the Assyrian kings to the god Bel. And from this, the temple in the old days used to be maintained and the sacrifices offered to the god. But at the time of which I'm speaking, that is Arian, writing in the 2nd century CE, I'm speaking the Chaldeans themselves had the disposal of the god's property, as there was nothing upon which the income could be spent. For these reasons, it occurred to Alexander that they might not want him to enter the city, lest the rebuilding of the temple might be completed rapidly, and they, in consequence, lose the benefit of the money. So he felt they wanted to keep the money more so than have the temple restored. Nevertheless, Aristobulus tells us that Alexander, so far as changing his direction was concerned, was ready to yield to their wishes. On the first day he halted with his men on the Euphrates, and on the next he advanced, keeping the river on his right hand, with the intention of first passing the western section of the city and then wheeling to the eastward. And then it goes on to talk about how he left the city. So that's essentially the description I wanted to read from Arian regarding the temple and Alexander's involvement and the tower and his intent to rebuild the city upon the original foundations. Because we're going to look at what's remaining of it in just a moment.
We're going to do that right now, okay? This is the last part of what I want to show you on the actual, evidence of the Tower of Babel, the stuff that you probably thought I was going to focus on mostly, and I guess we are, but it's not the main reason I'm bringing this up. It's a big part of it. I did and do feel like we should know this material well, and I wanted to go over it again. But something else in this account is why I'm doing this. But I want to make it clear how real this account is before I reveal that other thing, okay? So now, last part, pictures. Here's what the Tower of Babel looks like today. It's still there, exactly where it has been the whole time, where history, records all state in Babylon. We have read the 6th, 7th century inscription from Nebuchadnezzar and the restoration of the Tower of Babel. And we reviewed Arian of Nicomedes, a Greek historian of the 2nd century's account of of Alexander's involvement with the Tower of Babel. How he wanted to clear it away, definitely damaged it, maybe not intentionally, but in order to improve it. And so here's what it looks like today.
So there's no reason to doubt them. Here is an image, an aerial image of what remains of the Tower of Babel. And you can kind of see a little piece of a tower right here. There's some walls right here on the inside walls. We're going to get closer views of those in a minute. This is actually,
So again, this is the remains. This is an aerial view of the perimeter, basically, and part of the structure and other associated features of the Tower of Babel, the Temple of Marduk, Etemenanki, the tower that Nimrod and the Babylonians, prior to the confusion of languages around 3000 BCE, began to construct, but that Jah interfered with because he wanted to spread them around the earth. And he felt they would be able to achieve things beyond what he wanted them to achieve, the account says. Nothing would be unattainable, and that's what he prevented. And so you can see today, if we had had our language the whole time shared as one people, no disruptions, we'd be way beyond where we are now, right? So he was right. I mean, we literally, even with all the diversification of languages and division and wars and all that, look, we're in space, right? We're everywhere. So this is it's exactly like he said. Although, people at that time or somewhat later reading that, right? Things like we see today wouldn't have even would have thought possible, like in the first century. So reading the account of the Tower of Babel in Genesis 11, the first century, versus reading it today, there's a profound difference, right? Doesn't mean they couldn't have had faith and didn't. They obviously did. But what I'm saying is, we see that today and think, wow, that is incredibly accurate. If we had had an uninterrupted communication and ability to develop our God-given knowledge and understanding and wisdom, even sinful people, right, we would have gone, it would have been problematic, especially for the Messiah and the redemption of humanity. Right? We would have gone too far, too fast in ways where God's purpose would not have occurred as it had, in a slower development of humanity where these things could take place and the whole process be completed before we started to move forward much more quickly. In either case, I want to remind everyone, this is the perimeter, an aerial view of the perimeter of the Tower of Babel, the Temple of Marduk, restored by Nebuchadnezzar in this late 6th century, 7th century. I think 6th century, it said. And that Alexander the Great came and was considering removed part of it. Xerxes damaged, and has been standing in some form for about 5,000 years. And it was never finished by the original builders. Nebuchadnezzar came and finished it about 2,000 years after Nimrod. Okay.
fairly large. Here's another overview of it. So you can see the beginning of the different levels. You can see the outer walls.
And if you look closely, like right here, especially at the front part of the main structure, even this one too, but it's not as intact, but this one here, you can clearly see it ascending, right? You can see the ascending line on each side, just like you saw on the image, right? If you go back, I'll bring it up here. Where are we? 1858. Right here. See, look, you see those lines right here on the bottom? You see that kind of ascending terrace? And you have this ascending terrace on that side. I thought about this, and in my original Genesis video that we've been watching right now, I wasn't really sure what, because Herodotus says that he didn't see it, but he was told by people who had that it had 8 levels. Now, if you look at the description here, and again, the Tower of Babel was originally unfinished. So, and then it was finished by Nebuchadnezzar, and then damaged by Xerxes and by Alexander the Great. So, when you count them, if you just count them as in terms of the step sections, you have the first one, that's 1, second one, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I guess 7 if you count the very top. But I don't think that's a section like what they're talking about, because when Herodotus describes it the way he was told, that they're the surrounding sections leading to the top temple, the temple at the top. But if we count these ascending terraces, that is 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And I didn't do that in this video here. I think I just left it kind of open because of the different changes to the temple. So either way, I think there are 8 here, even in the reconstructed version of Nebuchadnezzar. So that would fit with Herodotus in the description he gives.
Walls, unless these are part of the levels right here.
Right, and see, that's what I was showing you right here. You look right here, right at this main section in the center, you can see these ascending terraces right there. Right, and it may, many other ziggurats I'm sure had similar features, but this certainly fits exactly what we're looking at on the Tower of Babel stele.
Here that were filled in, looks like they were, but it's hard to say because this part's all gone. But you can see the different levels, at least from this outer part going inward, and then you can see this outer perimeter. But most of it has been pretty much leveled. But it's still, look at the base. It's a significant amount of structural material still in place that to have existed for almost 5,000 years. This is what it looks like. This thing would have been massive, right? I mean, in its heyday, when it was built to the highest extent it was and then restored by Nebuchadnezzar, this thing would have been incredible in terms of its visual impressiveness. All right, now this is a closer image. So here you see, right? You see there's a little tower here. There's some walls here. Here's a closer look inside this huge mound of walls and levels, layers that were filled in. Here you can see, look at the bricks. You can see the windows. You can see the areas where they could, obviously go through the different levels, ascend the tower. And here you see again. Now this is the main image I was searching for. Why it took me, a few minutes to get ready. I thought I had this one set to go, but take a good look at this for a minute. Take a good long look, and I'll put links to these main images I've shown. There are more. You can look up on your own or just kind of search like I did for Remnants of Etemenanke, Tower of Babel. Look closely, right? Look at that. Look at the bricks. What did it say in the Genesis account that we read? Each man began to say to his associate, "Help as we make brick tiles and burn them." And the brick became as stone to them, and bitumen became as mortar. There it is. That's it.
Which is also what Nebuchadnezzar said he used to restore the temple, right? Same brick, same mortar. So I wanted to go over that with you all because I know how important it is for us to have confidence, right? To have belief that's based on the best available reasons. That's what we try to do. We don't think we have to know everything like for sure. Some things we might believe we know for sure, but most things we just have reasons to believe, including whether or not we'll get in an accident when we go out and drive in our car or take a walk on the road. Accidents happen like that every day. So why wouldn't they happen when we go out? Well, it's not likely and we take precautions. And so we just, in spite of the fact that it could happen, we know it's probably not. We have good reasons, the best, so we take our life in our hands all the time. We shouldn't take our life in our hands for no reason. Like I said, we do it for the best reasons. When we believe in the Bible, we believe we have the best reasons. That it talks about things, events, peoples, places, and things that are unique, that are not fiction. They're not legend. They're real events and peoples and places you can point to and look at today, like we just did, and show and say, okay, well, we have languages, we have it all defined from this period forward in the exact way the Bible describes. This is unique. Right? This represents a reliable look into history and events that matches exactly what we can show is the case around the globe with all languages, and specifically where the area is said to have been the source of all languages, we can see the remnants of the city and tower as well. Very important that we know that, so that when we read that and we talk to others, we're convincing, and for good reason. Now, what is it that is actually the main reason why I brought up this account? I hated to keep you guys in suspense, but I didn't want to bring it up and have you thinking about that while I'm talking about all this evidence stuff, I'd rather let's focus on the real details in history and evidence and archaeology, inscriptions, remind you of all these things, the Tower of Babel stele, the partial building of the tower, the leaving off, and Nimrod finding other cities, fouling them like Nineveh and elsewhere. And then Nebuchadnezzar coming and restoring the tower, Xerxes, Alexander, historians from the 1st century, 2nd century, and earlier, Herodotus, Josephus, and like I said, the stele. This is all consistent with the Bible, as is the date range for the languages that we see existing today and since the time that would be consistent with these events. So what could be more important than that, huh? What is it that we could be thinking about other than those details? Isn't that enough? No. There's more. Good to see you also, Miro. Nice that you joined us. Let's go ahead and take a look at the Bible. I'm going to go ahead and bring up the account real quickly. Most important thing, right? All that's important. I'm not saying it's not important, but what I think we should take away from this account, now that we can see this really happened, right? This account is special, like all the accounts in the Bible and events, communication, and what we can show and how it's consistent with all the things we talked about, that this is a big deal. What else can we take from it? This is what we can take from it. I'm going to show you right now. Okay, let's do it. Let's read this account. And then we're going to just talk about a few related things. Let me get over here. I changed my setting. And then we'll partake and we'll be done, okay? Thank you all for joining me. We've done it in about 15 minutes. Been talking about the Tower of Babel, all the archaeological evidence. But now, we're going to talk about something that I think is critical for us to remember. Because we're all being damaged by this, I believe, to an unusual degree today. And will probably continue to be. And certainly the people around us are. And will continue to be. I think the same thing that happened then is happening now in a worse way. Let me explain. First, the Genesis account. Let's go ahead and read the part I'm talking about. Genesis 11. So we've seen all the evidence. We understand basically the account, right? Look at this part. Genesis 11:6, 11:5. And Jehovah proceeded to go down to see the city and the tower that the sons of men had built. After that, Jehovah said, look, they are one people and there's one language for them all. And this is what they start to do. Why, now there's nothing that they may have in mind to do that will be unattainable for them. We talked about that, right? It's very interesting. Verse 7, come now. This is the part I want you to remember. In addition to all that other stuff, which, will help too. Don't forget this. This is probably more critical today for us especially. Come now. Let us go down there and confuse their language, that they may not listen to one another's language. Accordingly, Jehovah scattered them from there all over the surface of the earth, and they gradually left off building the city. That is why its name was called Babel, because there Jehovah had confused the language of all the earth, and Jehovah had scattered them from there over all the surface of the earth. Why is that the most important part? Think of how powerful that is. To be able to go down and start changing people's way of communicating by spending time with them. Now, we understand this is Jah, right? And the angels, this is Jah and his sons coming down for a purpose, right? They're coming down to stop humankind from congregating here and building this massive tower and going against Jah's purpose to spread people across the earth, eventually developed by the Messiah, right? So they're going down to do that. They want to stop them from opposing this spread throughout the earth. So they want to scatter them, like the account said. How do they do that? Well, it doesn't tell us how long they were there, right? Probably they were down there. We look at this account sometimes, and I think we don't appreciate the time. I don't think it probably took a long time, but do you think maybe that Jah and the angels went down for at least a year? Went down there and started talking and discussing it. Remember, this is Jah and the angels, right? We don't even know how many of them went down. So multiple spirit beings manifesting as humans for the purpose of communicating in a way that confuses people enough so they stop working together. They stop building this tower and staying in one place. That's incredible. And it's so believable, isn't it? Look at today. Look at the original account involving the first sin of Eve and Satan, and Adam and Eve. Right, I say Eve and Satan because Satan came to Eve and did what? He did the exact same thing that Jah and the angels did in Babylon. Now, I think probably took longer. I don't think Jah and the angels just went down. The account doesn't indicate at all. They just went down for a day or two and just started speaking in a way, and that was all it took, and they all just immediately changed their language. I guess they could they could do that with Jah's power. Probably, though, they just went down and started living with them like we see them interacting with others throughout the Bible to guide events and people, and started living with them in a way that developed this diversity of communication that ultimately spread them away from that objective they had and being together. Well, that's what we see happening, right? So I brought the account of Eden, Satan. He came down, went over and started talking to her, right? He found out what was going on, obviously knew certain things. He says, is it really so? And I can't eat of anything? Oh, no, we can eat of everything, just not that tree. Really? Well, if you eat of that tree, he knows you're going to be like him, so you're not going to die. Just the idea, right? Just the mess, just the words, the presence, the belief, the confidence of not being wrong, of being right, and her not having the experience. Clearly, she'd never experienced this before. Someone telling her a lie? No, that there's no record of anyone doing this before him. So she wouldn't have even known the threat existed, right? Because it doesn't even appear that Jah thought that was going to, he probably knew, in my view, he knew it could happen. I don't believe he thought it was going to happen. He reacted to it. He allows things to happen. If he wanted to know if it was going to happen, he could have seen Satan's motivation. And I believe his power could have also seen what Eve would have done. He doesn't work that way, though. He allows things to happen to see what people will do. So there's no, in my view, in many cases, this predetermined outcome. Sometimes there is, but most of the time there's not. Not in every single thing we do, I don't think. Or it's things like this, right? God allows things to happen, and the account shows that. It shows his surprise. It shows, even his approach to Adam and Eve, looking for them. There's no indication, right? What is he, just setting them up, acting like he's nice and happy and he's misrepresenting himself? I don't see Jaws doing that. He just chose not to know, and he was confident they'd do what he wanted, like a parent often does with their kid. I did it many times. I just trusted the right thing would happen. Most of the time it did, not every time. Okay? But it's different back then, right? This one thing was all that mattered. It was what Satan used. So there was not like a bunch of things happening. This was it. So you have that, right? And then look in the New Testament. Look at Jesus and Peter. Remember when Jesus is getting ready to do what's difficult to do, especially as a man, right? And he has to go through this stuff with all these imperfect people, knowing who he is. Peter, one of his faithful disciples, right? To the extent we can say a human is faithful, especially at that time, comes to him and says, Lord, and he starts talking about how he has to go to Jerusalem and he's going to have this fate, right? He's going to have to be delivered up. And Peter says, Lord, you got to be nice on yourself. You're not going to have to do all this. Don't be so hard on yourself, right? That's a tough thing to deal with because it's a message, right? It's someone you're kind of close to. Again, think Tower of Babel, Babylon. You're living with people, you're talking with them, they're telling you things, you're starting to learn a diverse way of communicating that's different from others who are hearing the other sons of God, talking to them, living with them, grouping with them, telling them these same words and communications. All right, well, take that on a little bit different scale, at least in the Adam and Eve and Satan accounts, right? Because then Eve went to Adam, right? He knew it was wrong, but just the idea here, I got this and I'm fine. It's good. The message, right? The words, the idea coming to you. Satan, you're not going to die. You're going to be like God. Don't worry. Never heard it before. Didn't have the understanding of the threat. The idea was enough to motivate the action. Same with Adam, right? That's why Jesus said to Peter, get behind me, Satan. He knew how dangerous that was. Even though it was Peter Peter it wasn't like Peter was being like Judas, right? Like trying to get him to not really do his mission. He was thinking about, he was kind of trying to be caring, right? He thinks he's being loving towards Jesus, sparing him from this fate, not understanding you're not Jesus, and he has to do something that's totally different from what you have to do. So you telling him he doesn't have to do that is actually a threat. It's the same kind of danger Satan put Eve in. It's the same danger Eve put Adam in. And it's the same danger Adam tried to put Eve in by telling on her when God caught him. So it's this constant mismessaging and attempt to change people's thinking, right? They can change the way you talk, the way you think. Look at the way society changes people today with the messaging, the movies, the TV, the music, all of it, much of it, right? It's pretty bad. We have points of light and things we try to show, hey, no, that's pervert, right? It's abuse. That's not normal stuff. It's abuse, bad for you, all this stuff, right? So, but nonetheless, look at the messaging, look at the effect, look at the effect of the increased messaging of the LGBTQ and tranny and homo abuse stuff has had on our youth. Look at how many now, more than before, and it's a lot more, identify in those ways because of the increased messaging, right? That's the only thing that's changed, basically. That shows you the power. Look at the way that the Nazis used propaganda and power to mislead the whole country. Look at the way groups like Watchtower use messaging and say the same thing to the very people that are already fully committed. Why would they have to do that? Because they want the messaging to stay with them, right? It's like telling you to go to meetings over and over again, but you're always at the meeting. The messaging, right? It's about doing the things they want you to do. Now, that's where we have to be careful, right? We have to be careful that we try to deal with people, but also, like Jesus realized, no, what you're telling me is a threat to my purpose. You're not in my position. You have no idea what I'm going through. I can't listen to you, right? Get behind me, right? And then it's up to Peter to be able to deal with that or not. And obviously Peter had a problem with that because Jesus had to then send Paul. But he loved him enough to do that. And Peter obviously at some point listened and died faithful. And so here we are. And that's up to Jesus to decide anyway. But he had an ongoing problem. We all do. None of us are perfect. But we're going to be a lot worse if we allow other people to message us in ways that it's going to have an effect. Doesn't matter. You watch a movie, you're going to be affected to some degree. Even if I go in to watch a movie to do a garbage dump, I haven't done one in a while. Maybe I should, huh? But then I have to watch the movie. See? So even if I did that, it's going to have an effect because that's how we are. That's how we're made. We're actually made to absorb and be molded after good stuff, right? That's why it's such a powerful thing on us. We're literally molded like clay with things like messaging, teaching, influence, direction. But we have sin introduced now, and so it messes everything up. Now the things that are supposed to make us better can make us worse if we don't filter it better. And that's hard because we want to believe other people, because we trust others are actually telling us the truth. And often that's not the case. It's up to us to decide when that is happening, when we're being lied to, right? Eve, she didn't do that, right? Adam, he didn't do that, or he fell for it. Whether we can determine lies or not, or whether we can see it's a lie and we're still fooled by the rewards or the accompanying features of the sin, that happens. But we don't allow it to have to keep happening. If we recognize the messaging from some source, any source, false religion, music, movies, anything, is giving us a negative messaging that's causing us to do wrong, we have to resist it. And that's the problem a lot of people find themselves in. Find yourself in a social circle or in a worldly way of life that's just got this messaging that's really powerful, right? It's alluring. It tells you what you want to hear. Lord, you're not going to have that fate. It's going to be a lot better. No, Peter, Satan, and out of here. All right. It's a big deal. I got to go through this. So, no. Thanks, but no thanks, right? Sometimes it's just you got to go because the mission, right? What you're here to do is more important. And anything that's going to keep you away from Jah, Jesus, or doing what you know to be right should be enough to get your attention, right? To try to understand whether or not the messaging is really benefiting you or not. So I wanted to highlight that account of the Tower of Babel. I wanted to give you archaeological evidence, historical evidence, consistent with the Bible that shows we have reasons to believe, right? Just like the book of Hebrews talks about all these faithful people who had reasons to believe. They didn't believe for no reason. Every single one of those faithful people had reasons for their faith, just like we do. And that's just the Tower of Babel. We have all kinds of other stuff that uniquely fits everything else we're told is true in the Bible. So I'm very happy that you've all joined me to discuss these things. I hope you remember them, share them with others wherever you can. Remember even more so, though, when you talk about the account of the Tower of Babel and all the evidence we have from the languages to the archaeology, to the timeline of events, humanity, don't forget that a big part of that account explains why we are affected so easily the way we are. Messaging. Right? We can be influenced. We can be influenced very easily and to great extents to the point where we start speaking a whole nother language where we don't even know what a man or a woman is anymore, right? If we're not careful and we allow this world to message us into oblivion where we're just like gone, right? No way back, right? And of course, there's always a way back. Just try not to go too far. And it'll be a lot easier to get back. And so the messaging, resisting the messaging will help you stay closer, right? Because most of this messaging is all lies anyway. What's the benefit of all this stuff they're telling you? Whatever it is, excessive money, drugs, pervert stuff, right? What is actually better than doing things the way Josh says, in balance with respect and love, not being arrogant, being forgiving, but also being resistive to false messaging, lies, deceit. Nothing is better than that. It's just a question of how good we do it, right? All that other stuff is excessive, abusive, and usually destroys you at some point far earlier on in your life than had you listened to John in the first place. At least that's been my experience. So I appreciate everything that you've shared with me in your chat comments. I want to go ahead and partake of the bread and wine with you all, representing Jesus' blood and body given on our behalf for our sins and those of the world and those who believe in him, the things he did in fulfillment of the law of Moses to redeem us from Adam's sin, which is why we die. And that's why we partake of the bread, which represents his sinless body as the last Adam. And why we partake of the wine, which represents his blood. It looks like you guys had a great time in the chat. There's a message that says the chat was disconnected, but it came back. So that's good. I hope you all enjoyed today's session, our weekly show. I'll be back again next week, show number 33, next Saturday. But I'll also be back tomorrow, Sunday. I'll put up a notice, text reading. I think they're great, right? I don't know why a lot of people don't review them. Maybe it's just the text reading part seems a little boring, but I think we have a great time. We enjoy the text. We review my translations, we discuss them. We're getting into the book of Proverbs, so I hope you'll join me. That'll be tomorrow. I'll put a notice up. And until then, May Jah bless you. In Jesus' name.